Hi, this is Raj from MR Sportscars. In this video I'm going to talk about Porsche 911s and specifically the 997 Gen 1s, which are from 2005 to 2008. I used to sell a lot of these cars in particular, Carrera 4Ss and Carrera Ss. And the one big issue that they have, which is in some people's eyes pretty catastrophic, is an issue called bore scoring. So on the internet you read a lot of buyer's guides about these cars, and they also mention the IMS, which is the intermediary shaft bearing, which if that fails, then it causes a catastrophic failure of the bottom end of the engine. Another more sort of less detectable issue is bore scoring, which is essentially where the pistons start rubbing against the sides of the cylinders, and initially it doesn't cause a huge amount of issues or performance problems, but over time the scoring gets worse. You find that the car starts using a lot more oil, it starts smoking a lot more, and also it will eventually lead to the engine seizing, which will then also, just like the IMS issues, require the car to have a full engine rebuild. Now, as I said, I used to sell quite a few of these cars, Carrera 4Ss and Carrera Ss. This is a 2006 Carrera 4S, so it's got the slightly wider rear end, 4.4 centimetre wider, and you can tell that it's wider because it has this extra lip around the light here. The Carrera S's and 4S's have the same engine, which is a 3.8 litre flat six water-cooled engine. There's a lot of different theories about why these cars suffer from what's called bore scoring, from not being allowed to heat up correctly before increasing the revs on a drive, the longevity of oil, the types of oils that are used. Other people say that the lack of use can also cause issues because it essentially lets the cylinders go dry. And then one of the most prevalent theories about why these cars have engine issues is to do with how the engine distributes the oil as the engine is running, and some say it doesn't distribute it evenly, which leads to, and also with regards to the cooling as well, that they do not evenly cool the cylinders, which can cause essentially spots in the cylinders that are essentially either dry or too hot, which then causes them to essentially wear prematurely as the pistons are going up and down. They're not sufficiently lubricated, and those spots start essentially drying up and becoming friction spots for the piston rings to start rubbing against. That's probably the most likely, but all the others can sort of play their role into the whole bore scoring sort of scare story. And a lot of people say, well, it is quite a scare story, only a few cars are affected, but from my experience actually quite a lot of these cars now are getting to the age and mileage where they're sort of showing the first signs of scoring. As a result, I don't actually stock these cars anymore, except for if they've already been rebuilt, preferably by a company called Hartec, and that they've done a full engine rebuild. The issues initially start occurring on cylinder 6, cylinder 5 and cylinder 4, which is on this side of the engine here. If those start to show issues, sometimes owners or dealers who have the cars and discover this issue find scoring on those, but the other three, cylinder 1, 2 and 3 on the other side, are clear. They may just rebuild half the engine, because essentially you can actually split the block. You can just take off this side of the engine, take it away to the workshop, skim out the cylinders and fit new liners with appropriate sort of either a new protective coating, or you can use steel liners which essentially don't require any coating at all, and they will just work. The trouble is that if you leave 1, 2 and 3, a lot of people do believe that over time those will also start seeing issues. So this car has had a full Hartec rebuild 7,000 miles ago. It's covered 75,000 miles and in 2017 it was discovered that this car had scoring, and I'll talk through actually all the work that they had to do around that issue. I'll just open up the boot. So in these engines, there's not actually that much you can see in these engine bays, because essentially the engine is tucked in right there, which is the top of the engine. So if you imagine at the side of the car, the engine actually goes almost sort of to here. So in that whole area is that 3.8 litre flat six lump. And as I said, cylinder 6, which is down here, 5 and 4 are the ones that start to have issues first. And one of the early telltale signs is that when you look at the exhaust pipes, you see uneven amounts of blackness to the tips. So these are pretty even, they haven't been over polished. Also look out for ones that have been over polished and are perfect, because that shows that maybe someone is trying to hide the fact that it has got the early signs of oil basically working its way through the engine and out through the exhausts and staining the exhaust tailpipes. If you obviously sand it all away and polish it away, then you can't tell. You'll only figure it out probably 3 months down the line, or if someone puts a camera down the cylinders by removing, you can remove the spark plugs and you can put a camera down each cylinder to look at the walls with that camera to see if there are any lines, vertical lines going up and down the cylinders. Now when these cars start to display the first telltale signs, when you start it up, there is obviously always a lot of smoke that comes out of these cars, but it should dissipate to a level where it's barely noticeable. Obviously on a very cold day it will be more prevalent, but what you'll see is there'll be more smoke coming out of this end. So even though the issues are on this side of the engine, the exhaust actually crisscrosses, so this side of the engine actually outputs through there, this side of the engine actually outputs through here. So the one you want to look out for is there more smoke on this side? And that's one of the most common ways of telling whether the car has issues. However, I've seen a car with 35,000 miles, full Porsche history, has never used oil, doesn't smoke on startup, doesn't smoke on a drive, and we put a camera down it and it needed at least 4 and 6 replacing. More than likely you would just rebuild the whole engine. So again, it's very difficult to say with certainty whether a car has bore scoring or not without taking out the plugs, putting a camera down each cylinder, looking for actual wear marks up and down the cylinder walls. And that's the main issue that a lot of people worry about when buying these cars is, has it got bore scoring? And the tricky answer is that you don't know for sure whether it does or not, or whether it will get it. So a 30,000 mile car might be fine, but at 50,000 miles it might start occurring. This car was detected at 67. Who knows when those initial lines started showing on the engine? It could well have been over 50,000 miles. The other thing with these cars also is if it has got slight wear on the cylinders, then it isn't the end of the world, because some specialists have seen cars that they've detected there being issues where it's started to score, and it's then run for another 20,000 miles before it's actually got to a point where it's using so much oil and it's so noisy that it requires a rebuild. So someone will have enjoyed it for another 20,000 miles after it started scoring. So, and with values of these sort of being very stable, if a car needs the work, you could hopefully have enough time to save up for a rebuild. You could then even upgrade it to a 3.9 or a 4 litre build, which is something that Hardtech offers, so you can actually sort of make it a better car than it was originally. Now, as I said, this car has been rebuilt by Hardtech in 2017. The engine was actually sent to them and by another garage. Hardtech did the rebuild, sent the engine back, and the garage fitted it and did all other necessary work, which I'll show you in the file here. So So essentially here is the actual invoice. All of the amounts have been blanked out because obviously it was from a trade build to a dealer who refitted the engine. But then here is the final sort of bill, as it were. So what I've got here is the total bill. Now actually a dealer sold this car, and while it was in the warranty period, it was discovered that this car needed a rebuild. So they actually contributed towards this rebuild. So they paid £4,200 towards this build. Now in total, the rebuild on this car cost in the region of £12,000, which is a huge amount of money, because this car typically will sell for a Carrera 4S under 100,000 miles, will typically sell for around £25,000 to £30,000, depending on the condition of it and the provenance and everything else. So for that big chunk of money to need to go to basically just keep it on the road and keep it running as it should is a bit of pill for someone to swallow. And it's not just the engine that needs rebuilding. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other things that you need to do as well. So obviously, when you get an engine rebuilt, you need to replace your spark plugs. You need to replace many of the exhaust bolts and gaskets, because quite often they'll be at a point where they're starting to show corrosion. They may have already seized, so you have to kind of drill them out, get them off, to get the exhaust off, strip out all of the exhaust so that you can take the engine out. And then while you're there with the engine out, you can do other things. You can replace the water pump, which is also a common thing that goes as the cars get older. Also, all of the pipe work, there's coolant pipes that are above the engine, which are very hard to get to you have to drop the engine, so you might as well do that work as well. And this work included all of that stuff. I'll just read out the description of the rebuild. Engine rebuild, including exchange recoated piston set with new rings, 6 new closed deck aluminium alloy Nicosil plated cylinders. So that's the key. This one, Hardtech have this great process of coating the new cylinder liners with Nicosil, which is supposed to be very durable and prevent this issue from occurring again. They also cross hatch it, so it's actually more durable and actually can hold on to the oil and keep itself lubricated a little bit better than if it was just a flat surface. The timing chain set was also replaced, the timing chain guide set, the crankshaft bearing set, intermediary shaft bearing and low temperature thermostat. Also includes basic cylinder head overhauls, strip heads, decoke heads and valves, relap valves to seats, skim head and reassemble with new valve stems. So it's a lot of work, a lot of labour, a lot of components that need doing to get these cars basically to be fit and healthy, not just for the short term but for the long term, so that they do actually last another 100,000 miles, maybe more, before needing any attention mechanically. Now this issue that I've just described puts off a lot of people from buying these cars, especially privately, because they're worried that if that issue does occur, they've got a bill of in the region of 10 to 12k to get it sorted, and that does affect the prices of these cars. They're very volatile. If you have a reputable dealer selling them, quite often they will be significantly more than if you bought them from a private individual. And that's not just because the dealer may have spent more money prepping it, it's also because of that safety net. If something goes wrong, in most cases you have either 3 months or 6 months to say to the dealer, you need to either contribute or pay the full amount for a rebuild, depending on what the situation is, what they're prepared to cover. This issue also leads to some people avoiding 997 Gen 1s altogether. They love the shape of them. I mean, they're a fantastic looking car. They love sort of the round lights at the front, the shape of the rear, but for them it's just too much of a risk. And in that case, it's well worth spending that little bit extra and getting a 997 Gen 2, which is essentially a very similar shape. There's a few differences, like the shape of the lights, the shape of the bumper is different, the electronics, things like sat-nav and stuff are all updated in there, but generally the car is, by all intents and purposes, the same look and feel as the 997 Gen 1. They were made from 2009 onwards, and Porsche actually changed the engine build completely. So even though it's a 3.8 litre engine, it's got around 30 horsepower more, and they changed the actual specification of the engine. So they changed the coatings on the engine so that they don't suffer that issue of bore scoring. So a lot of people would rather spend in the region of £8,000 to £10,000 more to get a Gen 2, which they know is essentially free of this issue and also IMS issues. So when this car was rebuilt, also they upgraded the IMS to the larger bearing. The earlier cars had a small bearing, which was more prone to failure. Not every single one fails, but there was a more likelihood of that one failing. This one's been upgraded to the bigger bearing, and also Hartec remove the bearing side walls so that it allows the oil to pass through the bearing and keep it lubricated. The other thing they fitted to this car as a precautionary measure, and they recommend that you fit this to any car, even if it hasn't had a rebuild yet, which is a low temperature thermostat. So that means that the car is running at, I think, 2 or 3 degrees lower temperature. By having the temperature of the engine that slightly bit lower, it means that it's less likely to have hot spotting occur, which is in theory the reason why these cars start scoring their bores. So as I said, the things to look out for if you are buying one of these cars is, do these tailpipes here look sootier than these tailpipes? When it's running, does the smoke disappear or not? I suppose check the engine level, oil level before startup as well to make sure it is topped up. But essentially, even if a car was using oil, you're not going to know unless someone tells you it's using a lot of oil. So it's very easy to just top it up before someone comes to see it and say it's at full, it's not using oil. But only you will know after several hundred miles of use if it then flashes up saying it's low oil. Now, unfortunately, with these cars, Porsche do actually say they can use up to 1 litre every 1,000 miles, which is a huge amount of oil. So, but I would say if it's using more than 200 or 300 mil every 1,000, you'll want to do some investigation onto the engine. So you'll want to have someone, you'll take it to a specialist, they would let it cool down, they would put it on a ramp, they would pull out the spark plugs 4, 5 and 6 because they're very easy to reach. It's actually slightly lower on that side of the engine. They can access them from underneath without having to do too much work. And they put a camera down each of the cylinders to see and look around at the walls to see if there are any signs of wear. If you can do that check before you buy a car and it doesn't show any issues on 4, 5 and 6, generally the car should be fine at that point. Now, whether it's fine in a year's time, 2 years' time is another sort of thing to worry about. But at the point of sale, if they're clear, then there's nothing to worry about, at least for the foreseeable future. Now, another thing that people do, which I would recommend as well with the older cars that haven't had a rebuild, is to start using a different kind of oil to the Mobile One that Porsche recommend. Now, some specialists also recommend that you use a slightly thicker oil. One oil that is particularly recommended, especially by people like Hartec, is Miller's Nanotech, which I think is 5W40. So the standard oil is 0W40. It's slightly thicker, but it's got more adhesive properties. So it will stick itself, or stick's the wrong word. It will sort of carry on coating the cylinders for longer in between use, and on startup it will protect the engine a bit better. That's the theory anyway. Again, you can find advice from other people. It might be slightly different to what I'm saying or what I've read, but essentially try and use a more sympathetic oil to older engines. As I said, Miller's Nanotech is one that's recommended, or speak to your specialist about what they recommend. Keep an eye on the exhausts and how much oil it uses. But as I said, essentially it's not the end of the world if a car does have bore scoring. You can get it fixed my Porsche Specialist says to me everything is fixable, and it's true. All the parts are still available. Porsche even provide a engine rebuild kit now. It's called a short block kit, which is quite a bit of money, but I think it's in the region of £5,000. So obviously that's just for the parts. That includes all the timing chain as well as the cylinders and all of those parts for the internals. But then you run the risk of essentially that's built to the same specification as the original. So who's to say in 30, 40, 50,000 miles that one doesn't start having issues as well. So a lot of people do prefer to go with an aftermarket solution such as Hartex Nickersil lined cylinders and their rebuilds. So it's really up to you what course of action is best for you, but that's all the information that I have about this. If you want to know more, if you have any questions about this video or want to find out more from me, please don't hesitate to leave some comments at the bottom of this video. Obviously like and please subscribe to my channel as well. I'm a Porsche Specialist based in Hertfordshire. I specialise predominantly in 911s, Caymans and Boxsters. But as I said, these older cars, so pre-2009, I tend to avoid because of these underlying issues. I wouldn't want to sell one of these if in even 6-7 months time it needed a rebuild. I wouldn't be happy with that. I would rather only stock these cars if they've already had a rebuild and are obviously running as they should be, which this one is. It's just been serviced by my specialist mechanics, Porsche Care. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you found it informative, and thank you for watching.